You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We don't know specifically who the Chicago Bears will be going after in free agency and the NFL draft, but they did bring us behind the curtain a little bit on what exactly they're looking for at some of the key positions on both sides of the ball. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully every day. On the show today, we go through what we hear from the Bears really general manager and more so head coach this week from Matt Eberflus on what the team is looking at wide receivers and playmakers on offense, at cornerback as they look to fill out that depth chart, and of course, the three technique defensive tackle spot, all important on this defensive line, and perhaps potentially replacing Akeem Hicks or bringing back Akeem Hicks. But we'll look at sort of the traits they look for at each position, how the guys on the roster and also their own free agents fit or don't fit into those types of characteristics. And then we'll take a look at a few free agents and draft prospects that seem to fit that mold of what the Bears are looking for at each of those positions. Let's start at wide receiver. And really, we get into a little bit more of here, like generally speaking, playmakers for their offense, because they're not discriminating by position, right? It's not just like, oh, we need this at wide receiver, this at tight end, and this at running back. Specifically, they want playmakers, pass catchers to help Justin Fields. And so there's some bleed over a little bit in between some of the things that they're looking at those spots, but clearly they just want more of them, right? They want to have more weapons, better weapons, I think, than what we saw Justin Fields and Andy Dalton working with a bit last season. We kind of talked about some of the standout wide receivers from the combine on yesterday's podcast, and we'll get into some of them a little bit here. We've talked through some of the free agent decisions, including Allen Robinson and whether or not he fits into some of this mold as well. And of course, really the main guy that the Bears are bringing back is Darnell Mooney. So let's start with first head coach Matt Eberflus talking about specifically what they look for at wide receiver and also just the playmaking in general on this roster.
Yeah, you want explosive athletic ability there that can produce chunk plays. That's what you want. So if you throw a screen, you want a guy that can take it and go for 15 or all the way. So because the controlled passing game is just that, but the athletes are the guys that make you miss. And that to me is so you gotta have guys that are quick, explosive, strong. They have to be strong at the point of attack to be able to block because we're gonna we're put a big onus on the running game. They have to be able to do that. And then you have to have different traits at different positions. One guy might be quick. He's really a short route runner. Another guy could do it all. That would be our number one receiver, should be able to do that. And then the other guy should be able to take the top off the defense because that puts stress on the defense. And then you couple that with a tight end that has the ability to flex out and create mismatches. I think all those things with a great running back that's great out of the backfield, then you can't lean your defense a certain way. And I think you create a lot of stress vertically and horizontally when you have all those different traits, not only at the receiver position, tight end position, at the halfback position as well.
So a few different things there from Eberflus, right? They want a number one wide receiver that can kind of do it all. They want a short route runner, sort of the short, quick underneath type guy, and then another guy that can take the top off and be more of that vertical threat. And I should say too, right, that these are not going to be like steadfast rules that everyone has to fit into this mold, or else the Chicago Bears are not interested in them, but just sort of an idea of what they might be looking for. And it's interesting because Darnell Mooney, for example, on the roster coming back now, he kind of can do it all, right? I mean, he's obviously has the speed and can go vertical and win over the top. He's shown an ability to be a quick route runner underneath. He seems to be able to hit that intermediate area as well. So like he's in this realm of being able to do it all, but I don't know that he's quite a true number one wide receiver. Like he's it seems like he's close and maybe can get there. We just haven't necessarily seen it operate in an offense that way to be able to rely on and say, yes, for sure, Darnell Mooney is a bona fide number one wide receiver. Because, like, I think prior to this past season, Allen Robinson had showed us a guy who can do it all, who can win vertically, tough physical contested catches down the sideline. He can, in and out breaking routes, good route runner, savvy, gets open, can win underneath. He's not the biggest or the fastest, but can just kind of do everything at a decent level. So, like, he fits some of that mold that they're looking for there. And then, the likes of Marquise Goodwin and Damiere Byrd, that they have some of that speed to be able to take the top off. We just didn't really get to see enough of that in the Bears offense last season, but they've both done it at previous stops earlier in their careers. I think the idea is that you'd like to just have someone a little bit better than them. Like, I think Daz Newsome can be that speedy underneath type quick short area quickness that Eberflus was talking about. But again, ideally, you'd like to bring in someone more proven, better, and more talented. Like, I look in the free agent class, for example, at wide receiver. We've touched on a few of these guys over the last few weeks, but there is a lot of speed, a lot of vertical speed to potentially pair with Darnell Mooney to really be able to stretch teams, that way downfield. The likes of Mike Williams definitely fits that mold as, like, not quite a do-it-all number one wide receiver, but big, fast, strong downfield catcher. I mean, he was Justin Herbert's favorite target deep down the field. Like, that was how that offense was able to be so explosive. Obviously going to cost a little bit more than, say, like the lower end of the spectrum, Marquez Valdez-Scantling from Green Bay, or Will Fuller, or DJ Chark from Jacksonville. We're getting more in like the middle tier now. Juju Smith-Schuster might be in there too, as guys that are, great vertical wide receivers. But if you want the more like well-rounded Allen Robinson alternatives, like a Amari Cooper, if the Dallas Cowboys do indeed release him, they're seeking a trade. One of those two can be that reliable safety blanket type player for Justin Fields potentially, or in the draft, right? We talked yesterday about Christian Watson from North Dakota State, maybe playing his way, or I guess testing his way out of the Bears' range at 39, but a 6'4" receiver who runs 4.3. Talk about being able to do it all at that wide receiver spot. Maybe like a day two option in the second or third round, maybe George Pickens from Georgia, a little bit on the thinner side, but still, 6'3" and can move pretty darn well downfield and is able to really kind of give you a lot of different options at wide receiver, right? And then there's some other speed guys later in this draft that could fill that role as, number 3, number 4 type receivers that you hope to sort of build up in as they develop through their career. So that's sort of where the Bears are at receiver. There's kind of an open canvas here for them to paint this receiving core how they want through free agency and the draft. They can decide whether they want to bring some of their own guys back or just, really kind of revamp that crew to fit that type of mold they were looking for. It's a little bit more set on the roster right now, at least at cornerback, where a couple of free agents here or there, but a lot of young guys behind Jalen Johnson, a hole here for a potential new starter or two maybe in the slot. We'll kind of go through what Matt Eberflus wants out of his cornerbacks, who fits the mold on and off the roster, next on Locked On Bears. The NFL Combine brought lots of fun bets over at BetOnline, the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news throughout the season. But now there's some new NFL draft prop bets over there too, as far as, how many receivers will go in the first round, how many quarterbacks will go in the first round, and what type of over-under draft spot for specific prospects. Who's going to go number 1? Evan Neal, Aiden Hutchinson, some of those different guys, and all sorts of different bets for football, even outside of football season. Plus, they've got basketball gearing up for March Madness and the NBA playoffs, plus hockey, soccer, tennis, you name it. BetOnline.net is going to be the number 1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. Head on over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends and action you need to know. BetOnline, where the game starts. We know this Bears cornerback room starts and stops with Jalen Johnson, right? He is locked in as one of your cornerback starters, regardless of what he fits or doesn't fit in what the Bears might be looking for at cornerback. And we'll get into that in a minute here. Like, we know Jalen Johnson is going to be part of this rotation. From there on, I think it's a weird mix where they have, 10 other cornerbacks under contract right now, and I don't know that any of them are guaranteed a roster spot. You know what I mean? It's Jalen Johnson and then guys under contract, but wide open I'm guessing there'll be some competition, at least in the slot, unless they go out and sign a starter on the outside and a starter on the slot. But I don't think they want to go in, with the cornerback crew looking quite like this. There's going to be some kind of something added here to go with Jalen Johnson. And we got to hear from head coach Matt Eberflus on specifically what they're looking for at cornerback. And it's a little bit of a narrower focus, a couple things that stand out for them. And I think everything else they're more willing to work with what a player has in terms of size and length, for example, not something he mentioned specifically.
Yeah, so the guy, for us, it's a couple things. You have to have quickness. You have to have instincts. When I say instincts, that means that ball instincts. So you want to be able to, yes, react to plays and all that, but we want guys that are ball hawks at the corner position. And the reason I said quickness first is because to get the ball, you have to be quick at a transition. At the top of your routes, you're going to have to do a great job of transitioning to either bust what we call bust the triangle up or take the ball away. So those two things. Then really the last thing for us would be speed. You have to have speed at that position because you have to have makeup speed. You're going to be out of position sometimes. The receivers are some of the best guys on the field. So really I would say those three things.
Quickness, ball skills, and then recovery speed specifically is what he's looking for there. So interesting because we think of this sort of cover two type scheme as wanting, more like physical and sometimes longer cornerbacks because they're going to be, they're viewed as being underneath defenders a little bit more. And I think maybe that part of the problem is that perception isn't completely accurate on how these cornerbacks are exactly going to be asked to play. But regardless, quickness, ball skills, and speed. And we should reference to that ball skills there, like he said, it's not just taking the ball away, but he said disrupting the triangle. And then that's the idea of between a quarterback's hands and his body, like his arms and his chest form a triangle as he's reaching up for the ball and being able to disrupt that triangle to break up the pass, right? It doesn't have to be interception every time in order to be considered ball skills, but guys that are getting pass breakups, PDs, and disrupting catch receivers at the catch point. And so certainly Jalen Johnson has shown the vertical speed, the quickness, and I think to some extent the ball skills, right? We haven't seen high, gaudy interception numbers specifically from him, but breaking up passes and contesting that catch point, being able to recover with some decent speed and quickness, he fits certainly in that sort of category for what the Bears are looking for there. We see Kindle Vildor, for example, he's got some quickness. I don't know that he's explosive, dynamic, but he's not a slow cornerback. I don't know that we quite saw. We saw some ball skills too. It seems like for him, he kind of fits enough. He checks enough of the speed, quickness, and ball skills, but the instincts were not there, right? The reacting to routes and not biting on double moves and knowing where a receiver is going to move before he moves there and seeing the field openly and understanding the route concept and going, okay, if this guy in front of me is going to my right, then that means I should expect a number two receiver should come in from my left. Trying to understand the bigger picture for a second-year cornerback is part of that learning process. And I think Duke Shelley has a similar, quickness, right? He does have some of that short area ability to stay with defenders. It's just, again, being able to really see it fully and attack it downfield. I thought Thomas Graham was the one who showed maybe the best ball skills of the group, the rookie cornerback. He was able to get his hands on some really impressive passes there. He does have the quickness and does have the speed. It seems like he fits a lot of this of what they're looking for because he's not the biggest or the longest or even necessarily the strongest. He was physical and had a good motor, but right, he seems to kind of fit the mold of the types of players that they would be looking for at cornerback. And I'm curious to see what kind of opportunities they're going to give him this season, whether he's going to have a true chance to compete either in the slot or on the outside, or if they do opt to bring in some sort of veteran free agent to kind of disrupt that and give you more of a solid starter. Right? We've been speculating about Xavier Rhodes all offseason. He's been with the Colts the last couple seasons under Eberflus. Chatter is that Eberflus and Alan Williams both love Xavier Rhodes, and so therefore it hasn't been directly reported that the Bears are going after him, but you would think you have the coaches that like him. He's a free agent. You're trying to run the scheme. He's a veteran cornerback. You have young players at that position. You can kind of put two and two together there and wonder if maybe a reunion here could be possible, or maybe they want to swing a little bit bigger, right? Carlton Davis from the Buccaneers, maybe not the fastest. He's not slow, but not the fastest, but a guy who gets his hands on a lot of passes. And I do think has good short area quickness, right? And more of that bigger, longer. He's like 6'1" type of cornerback that I think he would be a nice fit, although going to cost you a pretty penny in terms of top of the cornerback market type money. You want to go like B tier free agent, Darius Williams from the Rams, a household name, kind of overshadowed by another guy he's fast, right? He has some real speed to keep up with receivers, but gets a lot of pass breakups. Not a lot of interceptions, but a lot of pass breakups. He's only like 5'9", 5'10". He's a little bit on the smaller side, but still can play that outside cornerback spot and be a consistent player for you there. Just not going to get the name recognition and the big money, perhaps, that Carlton Davis was. If you want to go like ball skills playmaker this year, Rasul Douglas from the Packers, had a huge breakout, kind of out of nowhere, rejuvenated his career, had a bunch of interceptions, a couple of pick sixes. I'm a little bit weary about paying a guy who all of a sudden has one great season after a number of really questionable seasons before that, but I'm not horribly opposed to it. I haven't dug in a lot on Rasul Douglas. I just kind of know what I know from having seen some Packers games throughout the season. Another name I'd throw out there in terms of speed, quickness, ball skills, Pat Peterson from the Vikings. Not as fast as he used to be, but still, the instincts to sort of make up for it, that he's always a step ahead. He doesn't have to be quite as fast and explosive as he used to be, because he's so smart and savvy and can track receivers all over the field. I'd be interested in seeing what he has to offer in that type of a role there. In terms of the NFL draft, Roger McCreary from Auburn and Kobe Bryant from Cincinnati both stand out to me as far as like ball skill guys. Neither one of them really impressed in the 40-yard dash. If they were more like 4.5s, but I thought they had some short area quickness and fluidity in terms of like being able to adapt that way. And really, these guys aren't going to be able to keep up with the Tyreek Hills of the world. Anyway, you're going to need safety help on some of the true fastest of the fast guys. Not to take away from what Eberflus was saying, that recovery speed is very, very important. But is a 4.5 from McCreary or Kobe Bryant going to remove them from the Bears draft board? I don't think so. It's just ideally what they would look for in that position. And I like the ball skills and disrupting the point of attack, or the catch point there, as big. I think the Bears find themselves not having that first round pick. So I think you can kind of get a sense of like they have some pieces they like at cornerback, but definitely, we'll be looking at other guys and should have some good options in free agents in the draft that are fast, quick, and with ball skills. Also looking at the defensive line is another really key position. We heard last week defensive coordinator Alan Williams talk about how they want to build the defense from the inside out, and that three technique defensive tackle spot is key. We've kind of gone through a little bit on whether or not the Bears should re-sign Akeem Hicks, but we'll go through specifically what Matt Eberflus wants out of his three technique defensive tackle, whether they can fill that with Hicks and Nichols and guys on the roster, whether they need to go outside, who they could find in free agency and the draft, next on Locked On Bears. A lot of different moving parts in terms of figuring out where this defense is going to come together at cornerback, at the defensive line. And if you need help with moving parts, our friends at rockauto.com are going to be the place for any of your auto parts needs for your vehicle. Their catalog is incredible. It is so deep. They have every part you could possibly think of, plus 1,000 parts you've never heard of before. And yet, with so many options available, it's surprisingly easy to navigate. You just enter in your car's make and model, and then it pulls up all the different parts available for your vehicle. And you can sort between the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer. Don't go to your chain part store in your town and have the guy behind the counter ask you 1,000 questions and look things up. Just have to have him order it and send it to your house. Cut out the middleman and save some money in the process. RockAuto.com has the same prices for auto parts, mechanics, and do-it-yourselfers. Some of the part stores will have special deals and cheaper parts for the professionals. No. Rock Auto's prices are the same for everybody. So don't spend up to twice as much for the same parts somewhere else. Head on over to rockauto.com today and see all the parts available for your car or truck. When you check out, they have a box that says, "How did you hear about us?" Write in the words "locked on" so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Bears are going to need some kind of parts at this three technique defensive tackle spot. It's the pass rushing defensive tackle next to the nose tackle. It's the Tommy Harris role, right? It's where that interior pressure is so disruptive for opposing quarterbacks. And so you're obviously going to want to put a particular premium at this spot, and it makes you question for sure then whether or not it's going to be Akeem Hicks or Bilal Nichols, or whether they whether they want someone else completely or bring back those guys and still bring in more competition there, because you do have Mario Edwards as a possible player there. And we'll kind of go through a little bit more of the threshold here in a minute here, but this is Hicks's natural position. It's sort of where Nichols can play, but Nichols has played the nose tackle in for Eddie Goldman, has played the 5 technique defensive end in this 3-4. So it's a little bit murky there, and it's not a super strong free agent class, although there are some super strong athletes and super fast athletic freaks prospects in the upcoming NFL draft. But let's start with, what do they look for when they're that key interior pass rush on this defensive line?
Yeah, so 3 technique, you guys have known, the great names of the business is disruptive. You got to be disruptive. You got to be able to do a couple things as a 3 technique. Number one, you got to win your one-on-one matchup, okay? And when they run zone away from you, you got to be able to stay in the B gap, if I can say it that simple. So those are the 2 things we look for, and they come in all shapes and sizes, and you've seen it. But explosive athletic ability is the number 1 trait.
I think the reason why he specifies all shapes and sizes there is the likes of, like an Aaron Donald, for example, who is small. I mean, he's a small 3 technique. And on the other side of the spectrum are the Akeem Hickses of the world that are 6'5", 325 pounds. And Aaron Donald's more like 6 foot, 300 pounds, right? I mean, I don't know exactly Aaron Donald's listed weight, but that was what it was like coming out of the draft. It was like, is Aaron Donald too small to hold up in the NFL? And Eberflus kind of making the point there that no, as long as you fit the criteria, right? Disruptive, winning your one-on-ones, being explosive athletes off of the snap, and then being able to stay in your gap on the B zone is more about yes, you can be small as long as you're also able to hold up at the point of the attack in the running game, right? That's the other thing. You can't just be shoot up field, pass rusher, get in the backfield. That's very important. And you can be part of the rotation, in passing downs and come in on third downs as part of that defensive line package. But you got to be able to hold up on first and second down if you're going to be that every down 3 technique defensive tackle for the Chicago Bears. And so Akeem Hicks, when healthy, absolutely fits that to a T, right? Explosive. His first step and the way he's able to get off the line of scrimmage has been super, super impressive. Incredibly disruptive. We've seen, I love those plays where it's like at the snap, he's swimming the guard into the ground, and then he's in the backfield before the running back even takes on the ball. I mean, talk about winning your one-on-ones. But then also, Akeem Hicks has been so good in run defense in terms of staying in that B gap and just being big, strong, and physical with good pad level. That is exactly what you want in this 3 technique position when healthy. And that's been the challenge for Akeem Hicks the last few seasons, and why, we did a whole podcast on should the Bears re-sign Akeem Hicks and what different dynamics are at play. That's why it's kind of a tough call to make, because then you bring in the financial side and you're not sure what exactly you pay. You're not exactly sure how many games you're going to get out of Akeem Hicks. So then I think Bilal Nichols, by comparison, a little less explosive, a little less disruptive, a little less consistent in winning the one-on-ones. I think he's very firm in staying in the B gap. And we saw flashes of greatness from him as a rookie, but it just kind of slowed down from there, in part because they kept moving him into nose tackle for Eddie Goldman being out of position, Eddie Goldman being off the team or away from the team, and then injured a little bit in there too. So Nichols hasn't always been put in that 3 technique pass rushing position where he can show off some of these skills. So I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass there, or at least kind of sort of say there's more to Nichols than meets the eye, and certainly he's still a very young ascending player who's going to continue to get better. And it's in no way saying the Bears shouldn't re-sign him because he doesn't fit that mold exactly. I just do think the fact that he doesn't fit that mold exactly is curious. And then depending on what they do with Eddie Goldman, do you release Eddie Goldman as a salary cap casualty? Does that then incentivize you to bring back Bilal Nichols as a guy who has the versatility to play both of those spots? Or are you keeping Eddie Goldman and maybe you invest more at the other defensive tackle spot and let Bilal Nichols go? Because Mario Edwards has that explosiveness, right? Disruptive, wins his one-on-ones. Maybe not as stout in being able to consistently hold down the B gap the way an Akeem Hicks could, but Edwards is under contract and is going to be part of your 3 technique defensive tackle rotation. Maybe you can even kick him out and play that 4-3 defensive end in some of these sub packages, right? Get him, or maybe kick him inside to tackle in some sub packages and play him in some end and some base, right? I think he's got some positional versatility there to do those things, but you'd like to have a solid full-time 3 technique defensive tackle. Angelo Blackson is not exactly that. He's not the explosive athlete. He's not as disruptive. He's not as consistent winning his one-on-ones. He's stout. He's firm. He can hold some ground there, but he's not necessarily, setting that. He's not necessarily, giving you that interior pass rushing standard that you need at the three technique spot. And it's not a super strong free agent class specifically. I mean, you've got a guy like Sheldon Richardson, who I think most recently played for the Minnesota Vikings, if I'm remembering correctly, right? He's been that type of explosive, disruptive three technique defensive tackle. A little bit on the older side, like Akeem Hicks, but I think he can still do it at a high level and has sort of the consistency of technique to make up for maybe not quite as much explosiveness as he had earlier in his career. Or if you want just like a upfield three technique gap disruptor, Malik Collins from Houston is that explosive athlete. Not as consistent and not as firm against the running game either, but if you want to go like a little bit of a cheaper end guy to rotate in there with Akeem or with Mario Edwards and get yourself some different bodies and have different sort of like platoons on this defensive line, I think Malik Collins is a scheme fit first and foremost, even if he's not a sexy, guy you're going to love as far as like every time disruptor the way that Akeem Hicks was earlier in his Bears career. We saw a lot of really fast, explosive defensive linemen perform at the combine over the weekend. I look for Thomas Booker from Stanford being that three technique in that day two type range. Guy that Stanford had him play all over the defensive line from end to nose tackle, up and down, but great length, but an explosive first step too, right? The physical tools you want to be that NFL three technique defensive tackle, absolutely sign me up there. Or Matthew Butler from Tennessee. A little bit on the lighter side compared to Booker and not nearly as long, a little bit, not stubby, but just not as long, just kind of average length and not a lot of not as much mass, but really good at shooting gaps. And I think his quality of technique coming out of Tennessee, like coming in a little bit more refined, helps make up for some of that lack of strength and lack of length, because he needs it. He has needed it in order to be successful, to have good pad level, to have consistent pass rushing moves. He needed it more at Tennessee and couldn't just rely on length and size and that first step, although he is very good at quickness off the snap. So there are some options there. I still think I would prefer Akeem Hicks because I like Akeem Hicks. I just don't know what's going to happen health-wise and this age-wise for his career, and Bilal Nichols as well is kind of a wild card there. But it's fun to see that they do have options in-house and out-of-house, and we'll be keeping a close eye on how they decide to build this Bears defense all offseason long right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, we've got two new excellent hosts taking over Locked On Bulls, already getting things rolling over there. Go give them some love. Plus, our friends across the Locked On Podcast Network are always breaking down your team every day. I hope the Locked On Bears podcast is able to provide that for you and make it that much easier for you to bear down.